It came with an unwritten promise that they could expect $2.9 billion in federal funding from Congress to get started. However, just last week, we learned that those TIFIA funds are in huge jeopardy because there's only a small pot of money and projects across the country are all vying for a same piece of that pie. Is Congress ever going to vote the dollars for Governor Cuomo to build his new Tappan Zee Bridge?
Well, I am certainly an advocate, along with working across the aisle with Congressman Engel and Congresswoman Lowy. We have been advocates for making sure that $2 billion of TIFIA funding can be provided to reconstruct that Tappan Zee Bridge. I was privileged to be the first office in the state of New York, the first congressional office that DOT Commissioner Joan McDonnell visited to talk about just that plan. And I've been proud to work with Governor Cuomo every step along the way. I feel that it is very important to get that major interstate artery put in order. It's a great job creator for our economy to have the opportunity for our economy to grow with a renewed Tappan Zee Bridge. And of course, it's construction jobs right now. One thing we need to remember is that we've had $90 billion devoted to so-called green energy projects, picking losers in the marketplace. Those dollars should have gone toward actual infrastructure, toward the Tappan Zee Bridge. I'm an advocate for that kind of rational investment. That's not what you'll hear from Mr. Maloney. Mr. Maloney says he's a Clinton Democrat. He's a Pelosi Democrat. He wants to have an increase in taxes, an increase in spending on projects that will not benefit the American people, but will, sadly, waste taxpayer dollars that should go to infrastructure like the Tappan Zee Bridge.
Thank you, Ms. Hayworth. Mr. Maloney, a chance to respond. Tappan Zee Bridge, federal funds, will we get them?
Right. Well, I don't know where the Congresswoman gets this stuff. I mean, I guess if you work in Washington long enough and you breathe this Tea Party air, you get a little lightheaded. Here's what the facts are, folks. I mean, I created the Public-Private Partnership Commission when I was in New York State government. Here's what that means. We would get billions of dollars of private investment working alongside public investment to get projects like the Tappan Zee Bridge going, and many more. I think we need a whole new generation of investments in infrastructure, but not all with public money and not all with public debt. We need to get the private sector focused on bridges, not bonuses. Now, my opponent talks about writing letters and working with people and joining a caucus. Unfortunately, Congresswoman Hayworth has not delivered 1 cent on the Tappan Zee Bridge project. I've heard her running around claiming credit for this $2 billion that's an application for a loan from a federal program that's just the kind of program you guys want to cut. And the House has never passed a real transportation bill. We need to get going on this stuff. And the reason we can't is because the Tea Party has ground everything to a halt with this fight over the debt ceiling, with this fight over giving tax cuts to multimillionaires, with this intransigence and this anger that says government's always the problem. We can do so much better. I've worked my whole career on getting billions of dollars investment in infrastructure. I want to be on the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee in Congress so that I can focus on it again. And I've worked side by side with Governor Cuomo for years. We'll get that bridge going, but I need your support on November 6th.
Mr. Maloney, thank you. Ms. Rose has a follow-up question for Nan Hayworth only.
Yeah, Ms. Hayworth, Governor Cuomo wants to put a shovel in the ground by early 2013. That's 3 months, 4 months away right now. To the point that Mr. Maloney just made, not just is 1 cent, but there's not a dime in place for this bridge, not even at the state level. When is Congress going to take the TIFIA vote? How soon will New York State know whether or not that $2.9 billion is going to be in the state coffers?
Well, Janine, the one thing I can tell you for sure is when that vote happens, I'm going to be an advocate, as I have been from the start, for that funding to come to this Tappan Zee Bridge. It's crucial to have that advocacy from New York and to be able to work across the aisle to make these things happen. We need to have an economy that will support all the projects that we want to accomplish together. And when Mr. Maloney talks about public-private partnerships, that's a wonderful thing, but it can't happen unless we actually have a private sector that can grow. And with the policies he's proposed, we're not going to get that.
Congresswoman, if you need more time to answer that, because we have a little extra time on the Tappan Zee Bridge, Ms. Rose was asking if you think we're going to get a shovel in the ground in the spring. What do you think?
That's certainly my goal. This is a very important goal for our district. I am fighting for it. I have been with Governor Cuomo's team from the start, working to make this happen, and I will continue to be.
Mr. Maloney, very quick, just a response to that.
Yeah, I think when the Congresswoman says it's a goal, I mean, that's your cue for nothing is happening. And one of the reasons there's no vote, Janine, is that Congress took the earliest recess since 1960. Apparently, the Tea Party thinks that things are going so well in Congress, they can knock off early, and you're paying for their vacation. This is the earliest congressional recess since 1960. but we have huge problems to work on. So there's not going to be that TIFIA vote, Congresswoman, you know that, because you're out here at taxpayer expense campaigning, when you ought to be in Washington solving these problems. Look, we didn't get the Farm Bill done for the same reason. That hurts Orange County farmers. We didn't get the Violence Against Women Act done because the Congress isn't working, it's fighting.
Thank you, Mr. Maloney. It's time now for another question from the voting public. This one comes from a woman named Barbara, and it's about how the government can help seniors. Take a listen.
My question to our candidates is, what will they do to make it easier and more manageable for our seniors and their health care?
All right, seniors and health care. This time we would like to hear from Mr. Maloney on this topic. Mr. Maloney.
Well, this is very important, and we can't speak enough about the guaranteed benefit of Medicare. We need to keep that going. My opponent wants to replace that with a plan that will cost you $6,400 a year. She also wants to reopen the prescription drug donut hole so you won't get coverage for those drugs. You know, I met a man named Gary at the Yankee Clipper a little while ago. Gary was a railroad engineer on Metro North for 37 years. He gets railroad benefits, but he depends on Medicare for his health care. He said, man, if you take away Medicare, I'm in real trouble. And I can't afford my drugs because he said, I've got diabetes. And right now I hit the prescription drug donut hole in a couple of months. My opponent, Congresswoman Hayworth, would repeal the health care reform that says, no, we're going to cover those drugs. I think that's wrong.
Thank you, Mr. Maloney. Ms. Hayworth, your chance to respond on Medicare and seniors.
Well, I've actually had the privilege of holding a number of town hall meetings with our seniors, with New York State's Medicare advocate for seniors, so that we can actually help them solve a lot of the problems that they have just getting around the Medicare system. But more to the point, we have to save Medicare for the future by acting now, to put $716 billion back into Medicare by repealing and replacing the 2010 health law, by getting Americans back to work so that they can shore up Medicare, and by having a realistic plan for the $40 trillion hole that is going to be facing us as early as 2016. Medicare is unfortunately running out of money. It's going bankrupt. So to do nothing, which is essentially what Mr. Maloney has said, to do nothing, to innovate nothing, to have no mature conversation will not help us.
Thank you, Ms. Hayworth. We want to get to another round of questions, round 3. This is going by pretty fast. We want to get back to Janine Rose from News 12. She has a question this time for Sean Patrick Maloney.
Mr. Maloney, it's no secret that much of President Obama's agenda has been thwarted by the partisanship in Washington. But what if the tables are turned and Mitt Romney is the president who takes office January 1st? Will the Democrats become the obstructionists, or are you prepared to work both sides of the aisle to perhaps provide tax reform and or jobs, which is what the public is asking for?
Yeah, listen, if they won't get my help if they want to block reform. I'm not going to Washington to work for one party. I'm going to Washington to work for you. And when the president's right, I'll agree with him. And when he's wrong, I'll say so. That's what I've said about the president's health care reform bill. I don't support it all, but I support a lot of it. And I think we ought to fix what's not working and move forward. You know, when my opponent says she wants to have a mature conversation with you about Medicare, that means she wants to end the guaranteed benefit of Medicare. And I do have a plan. It's called negotiating prescription drug prices, which are a huge part of the Medicare program. It's called using the power of Medicare to get better prices. So you don't pay $10 when you go get an aspirin in the hospital. It's about bending the cost curve of healthcare by getting better patient outcomes at less cost. We balanced the budget in the 1990s. We did it by making the very wealthiest pay a little more. And we grew the economy like never before. We created 20 million new jobs. Remember that? We created 800,000 new jobs right here in New York. And when I came back from Washington, I created good jobs in the private sector. I know how to create jobs. I've balanced budgets. I was in the governor's office. We balance the budget every year. But you have to do it by listening and talking with your opponents. The Tea Party won't do it. It's my way or the highway. They've ruled out, my opponent has ruled out, any conversation about making multimillionaires like herself pay a little more in taxes. And yet everybody else is supposed to sacrifice. That's just wrong.
Thank you, Mr. Maloney. Nan Hayworth, your response, working both sides of the aisle, depending on who the president is, your response on that.
Well, we were asked an interesting question at a debate on another network last week, and it was, had either of us ever voted for a member of the opposite party? And I could answer yes, I certainly had. My opponent answered no. And I think that tells you a lot about how he can work together with members of the other party. You've never found a Republican you could ever vote for, Mr. Maloney. I am a co-founder of the Common Ground Caucus. I founded it in January 2011 so that Democrats and Republicans could work together and cooperate and solve problems together. I was a member of the conference committee with Senate Democrats, Republican leadership from the House, Senate Democrats, working together to make sure that we could extend the payroll tax holiday, Medicare reimbursement assurance for our seniors, very important, and federal unemployment assistance for the entire year of 2012. These are key initiatives working across the aisle. It's very important to do those things because if we don't, we're not going to make progress. He still hasn't told you Medicare is going bankrupt by as early as 2016, a $40 trillion hole we're going to have to fill. What Mr. Maloney talks about are interesting ideas, but they're not a plan. You have to have a plan. I'm a doctor. I took care of Medicare patients for 16 years. I cherish that. My own parents rely on Medicare. Believe me, I have a plan to save Medicare. We have to be responsible, and I have done that.
Thank you, Ms. Hayworth. Ms. Rose has a follow-up question for Mr. Maloney only.
Mr. Maloney, you talked about being able to work on both sides of the aisle with the Democrats, but chances are if you were to get in office in January 1st, there'll still be some Tea Party candidates there. You going to work with the Tea Party candidates as well?
Look, I'll work with anybody who's working in good faith to solve problems. I've done it my whole career. One of the things I've done is I helped write the marriage equality law in New York, and we specifically wrote it so that people with religious objections or who are in the other party could vote for it, Congresswoman. I've worked with Republicans for years. When I was in the governor's office, that's how we balanced the budget. And Governor Cuomo, he's working with the Republicans in a way I support because they've agreed that multimillionaires like you should pay a little bit more. That's why Congress in Washington is broken, because the Tea Party won't talk to anybody. But I've worked across the aisle my whole career. I think it's a shame that my opponent won't support common sense things like marriage equality, because this Tea Party ideology just is a straitjacket on getting anything done.
Thank you, Mr. Maloney. We want to go now to Christian Wade from Newsday. Mr. Wade, do you have a question for Nan Hayworth?
Congresswoman Hayworth, your opponent has attacked you in the past over your support for lifting the Bush-era capital gains tax, as have other members of the Democratic Party. Do you support that, and explain to us why?
Well, the capital gains tax, when it was lowered, that's when Mr. Maloney says President Clinton did some good things for the economy, the main driver was that he lowered the capital gains tax. That actually occurred before Mr. Maloney's service in the White House with him. But when he did that, in fact, we did have a boom in our economy. He also expressed regret subsequently that he had raised income tax rates. A rising tide, President Kennedy said it, and he was right, a rising tide lifts all boats. When we make it easier to invest in our businesses, then we make it easier to grow and hire. That's why I passed the Jobs Act. That's why I was one of the key voices for the Jobs Act, which lets small businesses find it easier to get the investment they need to grow and hire. When we provide capital gains tax relief, that grows jobs. That's always our theme. Let's grow the economy, grow opportunity, and grow jobs. That's what people need more than anything else right now. And I have worked and voted over and over again to do that.
Thank you, Ms. Hayworth. Mr. Maloney, capital gains tax.
Right. Well, you know, for the Congresswoman to praise Bill Clinton and act like they have the same policies is night and day. I was with President Clinton this week. President Clinton has endorsed me, and I'm very proud of that. And it's because what we did in the 90s is a template. But with all due respect, Congresswoman, it wasn't a minor cut in the capital gains tax cut. And one of the reasons we could do that, as you surely must know, is that we balanced the budget and we were paying down the national debt. These guys talk about it. We actually did it. And we didn't end Medicare, and we didn't go after Social Security, and we didn't go after Pell Grants, and we didn't try to this mean-spirited cut to defund Planned Parenthood. We balanced the budget. They talk about it. We did it. But look, we can do so many things, but we've got to start working together.
Thank you, Mr. Maloney. Mr. Wade, you have a follow-up question for Nan Hayworth only.
On that same note, Congresswoman, if the capital gains tax on wealthy Americans is lifted, where would you look to make up that money from?
Well, look, we're talking about economic growth here, Christian, and that's the key. We need to make our tax code flatter and fairer. There are a lot of different ways we could do that. But when Mr. Maloney says he wants to raise taxes on the very wealthiest, if you're a small business in the Hudson Valley, look out because he's coming for you. He's talking about raising taxes on any small business that makes $200,000 or more. And if you're in a small business, it's very easy to hit that threshold. Mr. Maloney's going to raise your taxes. That's going to be a serious problem for our small businesses. That's going to be crippling. We need to help our small businesses.
Thank you, Ms. Hayworth. Mr. Bob Barone is going to have a question now from WVOX. This question is for Mr. Maloney.
Mr. Maloney, you've been quoted several times, and it came up here as well, that you would bring back Clinton-era policies. Now, that was 12 years ago. A lot has changed. What policies specifically would you pursue in the future that go back to that time?
Well, thank you for that question. I mean, when the Congresswoman says she wants a flatter and fairer tax code, bear in mind that the tax plan that she's voted for twice, the Ryan budget, under that plan, Mitt Romney would pay less than 1% in taxes because she wouldn't do a minor cut in the capital gains tax cut. She would eliminate it. And multimillionaires sometimes make all of their money in capital gains. So if you take it away completely, even when we have a debt crisis going on, that means the wealthiest get huge tax breaks while middle-class families keep struggling. I think we ought to do what works. And what we did in the Clinton administration is we asked the wealthiest to pay a little more. We also cut government spending. We reinvented government. We eliminated programs that weren't working. We eliminated waste in the Pentagon as well. And we invested in our people. We invested in infrastructure and in education. We passed things like the Family and Medical Leave Act. We passed things like the Earned Income Tax Credit. We did things like welfare reform. And the results speak for themselves. Look, it wasn't that long ago. We created 800,000 jobs here in New York, 23 million around the country, and we were paying down the debt. Sir, do you know if we kept the Clinton-era policies in place, today the national debt would not be $16 trillion, it would be zero. My opponent, she wants to blow a $5 trillion hole in the deficit with these huge tax cuts to multimillionaires, and she wants to spend $2 trillion more that the Defense Department doesn't even want on weapons we don't need. That's $7 trillion. Under her plan, the budget won't be balanced for 28 years. It's not a balanced budget plan, and even then you got to believe a lot of gobbledygook and fuzzy math. Look, we've done what works before. We should do it again.
Thank you, Mr. Maloney. Ms. Hayworth, you're shaking your head over there. I'll give you a chance to respond here.
Well, Mr. Maloney knows fuzzy math when he sees it because the $5 trillion he cites is just Enron math. Unfortunately, Mr. Maloney, for all his talk about being a Clinton Democrat, is a Pelosi Democrat. He will raise taxes. He wants to raise taxes. If you are a small business in the Hudson Valley, he will raise your taxes. That's the last thing our Hudson Valley businesses need. I talked with Jen, who's a cafe owner in Warwick, and I always ask small businesses, what can I do to help you? What can I do as your representative? And she said, you know, if you could lower our taxes, that would be a great help. I would be able to hire more people. I'd be able to do more. This is the biggest boost we could have for our economy. Let's lift the burdens on our small businesses. Let's make the climate friendlier in the United States. Let's cut the regulations like Dodd-Frank and the Affordable Care Act that are hampering our small businesses, making it harder for them to grow. Mr. Maloney will keep those things in place. He will keep those burdens on you. We need to lower our domestic energy prices. Mr. Maloney will raise them. He wants to close Indian Point, which is the cleanest, greenest, most affordable source of energy we have in the Hudson Valley, and he wants to close it. If he does that, your pollution will increase and your energy prices will skyrocket. This isn't a plan for the Hudson Valley. This is a plan for disaster.
Thank you, Ms. Hayworth. Bob Marone, you now have a follow-up question, this time from Mr. Maloney.
Thank you. Granted, increasing taxes on the most wealthy does bring in some revenue, but most economists would agree that that doesn't really solve the problem. It feels good, it helps. What cuts would you make or would you support?
Well, look, we've done it. I mean, I would eliminate any program that's duplicative. I think we ought to have a whole new effort to streamline the federal government. I've said we ought to use the power purchasing power of Medicare. I think that would eliminate billions of dollars of waste from the federal government. And listen, I have to correct one thing. You know, this is hard because you have to speak Tea Party. But when you hear small business, what small business means is 2%. 2%. If you're in the top 2% of income earners in this country, then you're right. You know, that's what Congresswoman Hayworth means. She means hedge fund owners in the top 2%. She doesn't mean people. She doesn't mean 98% of you whose taxes I will not raise. That is a Tea Party smear and a talking point because they want to scare you, because they want to keep giving huge tax cuts to multimillionaires. We can't afford it. Our budget can't afford it. It's not right. If we're going to make everybody sacrifice, Congresswoman, then the wealthiest need to pay their fair share too.
Thank you, Mr. Maloney. We want to go to Janine Rose for the final question from our panel, and this question goes to Nan Hayworth.
All right, again, we're going to shift focus a little bit. Ms. Hayworth, I want to ask you specifically about the attacks in Benghazi, Libya, that claimed the life of Ambassador Stevens and 3 other Americans. The Republicans and Mr. Romney have been very critical of the Obama administration, their handling of the incident afterward, the intelligence surrounding the attack. What did the administration know? What did they not know? Given the complexity of foreign policy, where do you stand on this whole issue? What are your thoughts?
The United States is the largest target in the world. I sat down with Prime Minister Netanyahu of Israel in August of 2011, and he emphasized that the theocracy in Iran which of course is the source of much of the trouble that we see throughout the Arab world, deals in madness. They don't have a rational approach that we, unfortunately, can deal with. So we have to rely on our intelligence. We have to empower our troops and our intelligence officers and all of the means that we can bring to bear to protect lives, protect safety, protect our country, protect our allies. We need to project that strength. There are lots of questions still being answered about the incident in Benghazi. One thing we know for sure, if the United States projects an image that says we cannot help our friends, we will not help our friends. If we have an economy that is weak, that alone will bring us to our knees. Admiral Mullen, then chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, has said that the most cogent threat, the most serious threat to our national security is our weak economy. Everything that we think about for our future has to include that crucial consideration. Who will grow our economy? Who will allow us to have that strength so that we don't appear weak in the eyes of our enemies?
Ms. Hayworth, thank you. Mr. Maloney, a chance to respond as well.
Well, thank you. Well, number one, what we've got to do is we've got to find out who attacked our consulate in Benghazi, and we need to bring every last one of them to justice. They need to be captured or killed. I don't care how long it takes. You know, I spent 3 years on the White House senior staff. My job was to prepare the president's daily briefings. Everything that went to the president went across my desk, including all the national security information, and that means I had to hold a code word national top secret national security clearance. These are complicated questions, and what we shouldn't do is what Mitt Romney did and a lot of the Republicans want to do, which is play politics with the death of an American ambassador. I think that's terribly wrong. Now, more broadly, we need to get our kids home. We need to get our kids home from Afghanistan. My opponent has opposed any deadline for Afghanistan. I think that's terrible. We need to bring our kids home so we can start investing right here in the United States. And we need to be smarter and more strategic about how we fight the counterterrorist threat. I've been in the White House. I've seen what works. We need to use drones. We need to use special forces. We need to use enhanced electronic intercepts and surveillance. We can be smarter. We can be safer. But we got to get our kids home from Afghanistan. And if Congresswoman Hayworth had her way, there'd be no deadline, and we'd just be going on and on forever. I actually think we ought to bring them home before 2014 because it's costing us $2 billion a week. We have been in Afghanistan far too long. It's time to get our kids home.
Mr. Maloney, thank you. Ms. Rose has a follow-up question for Nan Hayworth only.
Since Mr. Maloney raised it, Ms. Hayworth, I'll let you respond to that. What about Afghanistan? Mitt Romney surprised a lot of people during the debate this week, saying they should come home by 2014. It seems to be a shift for him.
Absolutely.
What is your thought, and do you think we could bring the boys safely home by then and all the military?
Janine, I'm a doctor, I'm a mother. I have 2 sons, both of whom are of the age in which they could enter military service. My younger son actually has been in Army ROTC. I attended 2 funerals this summer for majors, both West Point alumni who lost their lives in Afghanistan. It has become clear we do not enter into these to public service with our eyes closed to the evidence. It has become clear that in Afghanistan our troops are at unreasonable risk, and they cannot be protected when the forces they are supposed to be fighting side by side with are out to hurt them and to sabotage their efforts. They need to come home, and they need to come home now.
Ms. Hayworth, thank you. And we are almost running out of time, and we want to give our candidates a chance to give their closing statements. Representatives from each campaign recently chose the order. Sean Patrick Maloney, you are first. You have 2 minutes for your closing statement.
Well, thank you all, and thank you to News 12 for this opportunity. Thank you to Congresswoman Hayworth. You know, we disagree about a lot, but I respect her government service. It's not easy to do this, so I want to thank her for sharing the stage with me. Look, folks, we have a big decision to make. I'm a Bill Clinton Democrat. I worked side by side with Bill Clinton for years. I've also created jobs in the private sector. I've built a business. My family's created jobs right here in the Hudson Valley, building green-friendly modular homes, putting people to work. We can create a whole new generation of jobs right here in the Hudson Valley. But we have to turn the page on the Tea Party. My opponent has a different set of priorities, and she has a record. So, you know, behind all the sugary rhetoric and all of the doublespeak, the fact of the matter is we have a record to look at. And what is that record? That record is the number one thing she wanted to do in Washington was destroy Planned Parenthood. That was the first bill they put up. That would cripple that organization. That's just mean-spirited, and that's wrong. What else? Well, they want to end the guaranteed benefit of Medicare. She says that's a mature conversation. I say it's a bad idea. And the fact of the matter is, if we don't give $5 trillion in tax cuts to multimillionaires like my opponent, we can keep Medicare going for a good long time. I think we need to invest in and support our middle class. That's why I support Pell Grants. I don't think it's right to cut them the way my opponent would. I think we ought to support our troops and our veterans. My opponent would cut veterans' benefits by $11 billion, again, to keep giving these huge tax cuts to multimillionaires. We can do so much better. We know what works. We balanced the budget in the Clinton administration. We grew the economy. We created good jobs. If you give me your voice and your vote in Washington, I will work every day for you, for working and middle-class people, for regular Americans, and we can turn the page on the Tea Party. I'm asking for your vote on November 6th. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Maloney. We now want to turn to Nan Hayworth. You also have 2 minutes for your closing statements. Ms. Hayworth.
I want to thank News 12, everybody here, and thank you to Mr. Maloney for a spirited debate. And indeed, in this debate, you've heard a lot about character and commitment, and of course, the values that should be reflected in your servant in the Hudson Valley. When you listen to Mr. Maloney describe my record, you must bear in mind that you're listening to someone who is practiced at hiding the facts and at deceiving. His record shows that over and over again. His involvement with Enron, his involvement with Troopergate and the Spitzer administration, and of course, his most recent assertions about living and voting and paying taxes here in the Hudson Valley. These are serious questions of character. You know my character. I have lived here for 24 years, raised my family here, cared for patients here, and grown my small business here. I want to work across the aisle to help folks in the Hudson Valley grow jobs the way President Kennedy suggested, the way he said we should, by letting a rising tide lift all boats, by making sure we're hiring here and not merely hiring more federal bureaucrats in Washington, by making sure that we make life easier for folks here in the Hudson Valley, by cutting their taxes, cutting job-killing regulations that keep our small businesses from hiring, making the cost of living easier, making energy abundant and more affordable, and letting you make decisions about your health care, and of course, preserving and protecting the promise of Medicare. Take it from a doctor, the daughter of seniors, and someone who has felt the warmth of the Hudson Valley when you voted for me to be your representative in 2010. I hope to have the honor of continuing working together with you to assure that we have the kind of future that the Hudson Valley deserves, and I would be honored to have your vote.
Ms. Hayworth, thank you. Candidates, thank you both for being here. Hopefully by being here, we were able to educate our voters before they head to the polls on November 6th. That's going to wrap up our Vote 2012 News 12 special debate. We'd also like to thank our media panelists, News 12 Westchester anchor and news director Janine Rose, Christian Wade from Newsday Westchester and the Hudson Valley, and Bob Marone from WVOX AM Radio. Thank you all for participating. I'm Tim Cassidy. We want to thank you for watching, and don't forget, News 12 will have complete Vote 2012 election coverage on Tuesday, November 6th. We will be live with all the local results and candidate speeches. It's local election coverage you simply won't find anywhere else.